Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're diving deep into something you might not think is all that exciting. Release notes.
Release
Yep,
notes.
release notes. But honestly, they're more important than most people realize.
I'd agree with that.
And we've got a great guide for this deep dive. Senior technical writer Curt
Oh,
Robbins.
yeah, he's worked with some big names, right?
Yes, Microsoft, FedEx,
Hmm.
Wells Fargo, just to name a few. And he emphasizes that release notes are way more than just a list of updates.
I see that.
They're crucial for the user experience. They can actually impact things like whether people even use the product or trust the company behind it.
Makes sense. It's all about communication, really. When you get it right, release notes, it can even turn like a software update, which people don't always love,
Mhm.
into a good experience.
Oh, for sure. Think about it. How many times have you been annoyed or confused after an update, right?
Happens all the time.
And it's because the release notes were bad. Good release notes could have totally changed that whole experience.
Absolutely. One of Robin's main points is you have to know who you're talking to. Like a developer needs way different info in the release notes than just a regular person using a website.
Exactly. So like if I'm explaining a change to an API, I've got to give all the details to the tech people, but for someone who's not technical at all, I'd focus on how it changes what they actually do on the website every day.
I like that example. Shows how you really have to change your language,
Yeah.
and how much detail you give depending on who's going to read it. It's not just about what changed, but why it matters to the person reading.
Makes total sense.
Yeah.
And Robbins also talks about the structure of release notes. He suggests a clear header with the basic info, then a little intro summing up the release, and then sections for like new features, bug fixes, that kind of thing.
Oh, yeah. Organization is key, right? Makes it so much easier to read and understand. It's like, think of a well-organized library. You can find the book you want without getting lost.
Okay, yeah, I get it. So we're making it user-friendly even within the release notes themselves.
Exactly. And another thing Robbins talks about is context. Like, why was a change made? Especially if it was because of user feedback. That can really help build trust and understanding.
So like if we fixed a bug because people complained about it, we should actually say that in the release notes.
Definitely. It shows you're listening to your users, taking their feedback seriously, turns a frustrating thing into, like, hey, they listened to us, they fixed it.
I never thought about it that way. That's so smart. Transparency is so important.
And Robbins is all about using plain language, especially for people who aren't technical. You don't want to scare anyone off with jargon.
Right, we want everyone to understand no matter how techy they are. Oh, and Robbins also mentions visuals, right?
Yeah. A good screenshot or diagram can make a huge difference, like helping someone understand a new feature or how something changed.
I'm a visual learner, so that makes sense to me. Yeah. A picture is worth 1,000 words, especially with tech stuff.
Totally. Sometimes you need that visual to get it. So we've talked about some of Robin's best practices, but we can't forget the things that make release notes go bad, those things that make them more of a headache than helpful.
The release note fails. I've definitely seen a few. What are some of the common things to avoid?
Well, one of the worst is using too much technical jargon. It can alienate users.
I've been there, trying to read those, and it's like reading another language.
Right, but then being too vague is also a problem.
Like, the classic various bug fixes and improvements. What does that even mean?
It means nothing. Robbins also says don't ignore negative changes. Like if you're removing a feature or something, you got to be upfront about it.
Yeah, it just seems shady if you try to hide it. Transparency is so important, like we said before.
And we want to be excited about new features and updates, but don't go overboard about small changes. It's like you lose credibility if you're hyping up tiny things.
So it's about finding that balance between being enthusiastic and being honest about what actually changed.
Exactly. And consistency matters. Using a template for your release notes makes it more predictable and user-friendly.
Right. No one wants to see a totally different style every time there's a new release.
Consistency makes it easier to understand.
I'm really starting to see how much thought goes into good release notes.
Yeah.
It's not just about listing changes. It's about communicating clearly and in a way that's actually engaging.
Exactly. And Robbins really highlights this. You have to get feedback from users. If you don't pay attention to what they're saying, your release notes won't actually meet their needs.
That's true. The whole point is to inform and support the people using the product, right?
And obviously, you got to review everything really carefully before you publish it.
Of course. Typos, broken links, wrong information, it all makes you look bad.
Right. And one last thing Robbins mentions is don't forget to update all your other documents too. Like if you mention a change to a feature but your help articles are all outdated, it'll just confuse people.
That's so frustrating. Like getting directions to a place that doesn't exist anymore.
So there's a lot to think about when it comes to release notes, but if you follow these best practices and avoid the common mistakes, you can make sure they actually help your users instead of making them mad.
This has been so helpful. I'm looking at release notes in a totally new way now.
They really are more important than people think.
So we've talked about the purpose of release notes, best practices, pitfalls to avoid. What does all this mean for our listeners, all the tech writers and IT pros out there?
What's interesting is that Robbins is really saying, look, release notes aren't just a chore. They're actually a really important tool for building a good relationship between a company and its users.
It's about building trust and showing users that you care.
And Robbins really emphasizes transparency and user feedback.
Being open about when things go wrong, explaining why changes were made, and listening to what people are saying.
The key is honesty, really. Like, if you're taking out a feature, don't try to hide it or downplay it. Just be upfront about why you made the decision. Was it technical limitations? Did people just not use it? Or are you focusing on something else?
So instead of saying, like, feature X is gone, we'd say something like, based on what we heard from users and how people were actually using the product, we've decided to retire feature X. And now we're going to put more effort into, Y and Z, which do a better job overall.
Perfect example. You're giving context, you're showing you listen to your users, and you're helping them understand what to expect.
So transparency isn't just about admitting mistakes. It's about explaining how you make decisions.
Right. And the same goes for bugs. Tell people what the problem is, how it affects them, and what they can do about it in the meantime, any workarounds.
So, like, reassure them that you know about the problem and you're working on a fix.
And even more important, let them know how you're going to prevent it from happening again. That shows you're committed to, constantly getting better. Robbins talks about putting some personality into your writing. Use a friendly tone, conversational. Don't be afraid to show some enthusiasm or even, crack a joke if it's appropriate.
So instead of a boring list of changes, we could say, we're super excited about this awesome new feature. We think you're going to love it.
There you go. Let your excitement show. And think about personalizing the message. You could say how a feature came from user feedback or tell a little story about how it was developed.
That's cool. It's less corporate-y and more like a real person is talking to you.
Exactly. And those visuals we talked about, those can add personality too.
Like a fun illustration or a GIF to show off a new feature.
Yeah. Anything that makes it stand out and connect with people.
I'm realizing there's, a real art to this whole release notes thing. It's not as simple as I thought.
It definitely takes skill.
Yeah.
You need to know your stuff technically, but you also need to be a good communicator and really understand your users.
So we've got transparency, personality, connecting with users. What else should we keep in mind to make those release notes really great?
Clarity and being concise. Robbins really stresses that. People are busy. They don't want to read a novel.
Get to the point.
Yep. Use simple language. Cut out the jargon. And remember, not everyone is a tech expert.
We want everyone to understand no matter what their background is.
Exactly. Break down complex stuff into smaller pieces. Use bullet points, headings, make it easy to read.
Like we're giving them a map to navigate the updates.
That's a great way to put it. And speaking of maps, give some context for those changes. Explain how they fit into the overall plan for the product.
So if we add a new feature, we tie it back to the big goals of the product.
Exactly. It helps people understand why you made the changes and see the big picture.
Like telling a story, almost. We're not just listing things. We're showing how the product is growing and getting better.
There you go. And a good story. It grabs your attention, it tells you something, and you remember it. That's what we want our release notes to do.
This has been so eye-opening. I really get it now.
I'm glad to hear it. It's a part of technical writing that people don't always think about, but it's really important for shaping how people experience a product.
So before we wrap up our deep dive here, any last bits of wisdom from Robbins that we should share?
Yes. One more thing. Robbins talks about closing the loop with your users. You publish the notes, but don't just stop there.
We should go get feedback.
Yep. Ask them what they think, what their impressions are, and be open to hearing what they didn't like.
That shows we value their input, that we want to keep making things better.
Exactly. And it gives you information you can use to improve your release notes even more for next time.
Okay, I see how it all fits together. Clear communication, transparency, personality, feedback, it's all connected.
It is. It all works together to create a good user experience.
And that's the goal, right? I think the biggest takeaway is, like, release notes aren't just a technical thing. They're how you communicate with users, how you get them engaged, how you build trust.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Like Robin says, we always have to keep learning and looking for ways to make them even better.
Definitely. There's always room to grow. So let's keep learning, keep trying new things, and just keep making those release notes awesome.
I love it. So to everyone listening, go make those release notes shine. You can make a real difference in how people experience your products.
Yeah.